Hey folks, it's Dave with Alaskan Homesteading again. I am working on my Pathfinder tonight. It's kind of lousy weather. We're going into a little bit of rain and ice and snow storm, and I decided now would be a good time to redo this inner tie rod on my Pathfinder. The thing that you can observe here is that this is super floppy, and it's a little hard to tell, but it's got some in and out play on it, which is, both of those things are indicative that the inner ball inside that boot is worn and this tie rod needs to be replaced. Tie rods are in two pieces. You have the outer tie rod and the inner tie rod. The outer, I believe, is fine. I don't really think there's any issue with that. You know, it's got whatever movement it's got, which, you know, seems fine. It's still got grease in it. The boot isn't torn, and you know, I'm not having any looseness at that end out by the knuckle. So I'm gonna count off the number of threads here, figure out how far out this thing needs to be, because I'm gonna have to put this outer tie rod back onto the new inner tie rod, and you want to make sure that it's really close to where it was before so that your vehicle stays at least roughly in alignment. At any rate, I'll give you a couple more updates along the way here, but I'm not going to film too much while I'm working on it because I'm just trying to pay attention to what I'm doing. Okay friends, well, this is what your inner tie rod looks like. This one is quite worn out. It should be very stiff. You know, if you push it up like this, it should remain in the upright position. This one is sad and droopy. So that is a sign of a worn out inner tie rod. So my next step is to get this fancy tie rod removal wrench on here and pull this thing out. If you look back here, you can see there's flats on the sides of the tie rod, right there, and on the top and on the bottom. So there's 4 flats on there, and there's a special tool that will engage with those flats, and it has this long tube that sticks out and gives you I think a 1/2-inch drive attachment for a ratchet or a breaker bar to break that loose off of the steering rack. So this is that tool. It's just a long tube, and it comes with a set of adapters that all different sizes. This one happens to be 1 7/16, and the flats on this adapter engage with the flats on the tie rod end in here. So they'll sit on there on the tie rod end, and then the lugs on the adapter engage with these slots on the end of the tube. And then the other end gives you a ratchet drive so that you can twist the whole assembly. So this goes on here. And note, this happens to be a tool from my local Napa store. I rented it with my own money. They just charge you for essentially the purchase price of the tool, and then when you bring it back, you get a refund. But this is how it works. It slides over the tie rod and gives you this long extension, basically, to reach back there and twist to remove the tie rod end. I'm going to spare you the grunting that is sure to follow while I try to loosen this. That was far easier than anticipated. One good pull on the breaker bar and this thing came free. no problem. But you can see just how floppy this thing is. It's all used up. And now I can install the new one in the same place. Let's check. So there's the new one next to the old one. The new one is nice and tight, packed with grease. The old one is very sad. They do appear to be the same length, so that's good. It would be bad if they weren't. I've heard of that being the case sometimes when you order these, that they might not be exactly the same length, which means having to adjust how far on you thread the outer tie rod. But I think in my case, we'll be okay. Well, I had to go check some torque specs because this has gone very, very well. The new tie rod end is threaded into the steering rack, and I needed to go look for the PDFs of my factory service manual, which show that the torque spec is 88.5 Newton meters or 65 foot-pounds for the inner tie rod end connection to the steering rack. And then the torque spec for the nut that secures the outer tie rod end to the inner tie rod end is also 65 foot-pounds or 88.5 Newton meters. And then the nut that secures the outer tie rod end to the steering knuckle has a 63 foot-pound torque spec. So those are all of the nuts and bolts that I had to loosen, and then I'll now have to tighten. So I've got the tie rods, well, the tie rod ends reassembled and reinstalled here. Got the boot on. I was even able to get that little clamp done in the back. You can just barely see that little silver clamp. Yeah, hard to make out on here. Yeah, there it is. So that little silver clamp, getting that crushed in place was super awkward with the way this the space is above the steering rack. I had to really contort myself to get that crimped, but now I've got a good positive closure on that end of the bellows. This end has got the same little clamp that it started out with, and I've got my 15 threads or 22 millimeters of thread showing. So hopefully we're close enough in the alignment department. Certainly should be good enough, if nothing else, to get it to an alignment shop, because it's probably due for one anyway. But at this point, I am quite satisfied that this job is done. Just have to button up the car again, put the wheel back on. While I was in here, of course, I checked the brake pads. They're in good shape. Plenty of meat left on those, and everything else looks okay. This boot on the top of the steering knuckle seen better days, but we've got that greased through the Zerk at the top, so it should be all right. And otherwise, I think we're okay. These are aftermarket upper control arms that I had installed on here from SPC. Those are adjustable ball joint upper control arms to allow for a little extra adjustment range for the camber, because I've got a little bit of a lift on this truck, about 2.5 inches, which on the on this generation of Pathfinder is about the maximum you can do without really getting radical with suspension components. It's hard to get the camber corrected at that amount of lift, but it's good enough with these upper control arms in here. But that is going to about wrap it up for today. Thanks for joining me in my little automotive repair journey here. I kind of wanted to show this a little bit just to show that there's some of these jobs that you can do on even pretty modern vehicles with not a lot of crazy tools. You know, I had to have a jack and jack stands to hold this thing up, an impact wrench, you know, impact socket wrench here to take care of at least this nut. Made that a lot easier. You don't have to have an impact to take it off, but it helps. A good breaker bar for loosening the inner tie rod in there. The specialty tool that I rented from Napa. I mean, rental is kind of a misnomer. You pay them the $160 for the tool, and they let you use it for 3 days. And as long as you bring it back within 3 days, you get a full refund. So it's really a loan of the tool, which is super nice. And a couple other things. You know, I had to have these special crimping pliers for the little cable, the little clamp that goes around the bellows on the inside of that boot. But a lot of people will redo these things just using a zip tie instead of even the metal clamp. I prefer the metal clamp because I do, you know, go a little bit of off-roading with this, and I'd rather have something that's a little more sturdy. Other than that, a couple of wrenches here to loosen the tie rod nut, and pliers to take off the pliers to take off the cotter pin. That's about it. There's just not that much to it. Anyway, thanks for watching. If you're enjoying this kind of content, go ahead and hit that thumbs up. If you want to see more of my repair stuff and other homestead tasks, subscribe, and we'll see you in the next video.